Well, yesterday, Australians woke up to the sobering news that power prices are once again going up by up to 25%, in fact, for around 600,000 customers in South Australia, New South Wales and South East Queensland. It'll come into effect from the 1st of July. The Shadow Climate Change and Energy Minister is Ted O'Brien, who joined me earlier. Ted O'Brien, welcome to Afternoon Briefing.
Thanks,
You've been very critical this week of the government, saying that they've broken an election promise to the Australian public in bringing down power prices. Is it premature to be making that claim, considering that Labor itself wrapped it in some caveats about a deadline off into the future?
Well, not off into the future. They basically said in this term of government, they promised that household power bills would go down by $275. Now, households across Australia, they all know what's happening. Labor said this 97 times before the election. Every MP that sits in that chamber from the Labor Party, they sold that. They sold that to the Australian people, knowing that Australians would say, I'd love our power bills to come down. But what has happened since? They haven't gone down. They've gone up by hundreds of dollars. And we find out this week that come the 1st of July, they're going to go up by hundreds more, by around 25% for average households. So, look, it is a broken promise, and it's the Australian people who are paying the price, especially Middle Australia. There wasn't one single measure in the budget that is going to help Middle Australia with this. There was no measure in the budget that deals with the source of the problem of high power prices. So I think it's fair for us to hold the government to account for the promise they themselves made. I think that's fair. I think the Australian people would expect nothing less.
Couple of points there. You said this term of government. We are 1 year into a 3-year term of government. There is still room to manoeuvre there, isn't there?
Well, I would appreciate it if you'd have the Prime Minister or Chris Bowen confirming in the Parliament they're going to deliver on it. I mean, how many times have we asked them in question time, will you deliver on your promise of a reduction in household power bills of $275? We ask them, we ask them, we ask them. Every single time they dodge the question. So think about this. If you are promised your power bills will go down by $275, but in fact, over the first year already, they're up by around $500. Already you're $775 behind what was promised.
Is it disingenuous, though, to avoid, I guess, conceding that there are international factors at play here? You know, the war in Ukraine, just one measure which has sent shockwaves through global energy markets and has forced prices up.
Matt, I don't think anybody's denying the fact that we have had global energy issues, but it's the responsibility of the government of the day to manage the domestic fallout. Now, when it does come to Labor's promise to reduce power bills by $275, they continued to make that promise after Russia invaded Ukraine, after there was some problems in the international energy market. So it's not like they suddenly pulled away from their promise. They doubled down on their promise of delivering cuts in power bills after the invasion of Ukraine, and they continued all the way through while they're in government. So, no, if that was an issue, well, they themselves should have actually retracted it, but they didn't. They sold it to the Australian people. They've broken the promise, and they need to be held to account.
You've also said that there was nothing in the budget to deal with this. That's not quite true, is it? There was energy bill relief part of the budget.
I said there's nothing in this budget, one, to help Middle Australia with this, two, that deals with the source of the problem. Now, the source of the problem is a lack of supply, and in particular, gas. Now, the government has done everything to actually demonise gas. You know, one of their first actions was they took gas out of the capacity mechanism. They then went ahead and introduced caps on gas, a mandatory code on gas. They've introduced sovereign risk where we now even have the Japanese calling this out publicly.
But I mean, think about that. Considering how the gas market was behaving in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine, those prices going through the roof, are you saying that there shouldn't have been any intervention in that market?
The solution should have been to put more supply into the Australian marketplace. And here's the problem, Matt. Labor's general approach is one of big government. that big government knows best. Now, instead of looking at basic economic principles that says price is a function of supply and demand, if you restrict supply, well, price goes up. Labor isn't interested in those economic principles. Instead, their approach is government knows best. So they will put themselves at the centre of the marketplace. So basically, they ripped money out of the budget last year for gas pipelines, about $100 million. They ripped about $250 million out of CCS technology, which again assists with gas. It introduced caps. It's put in a mandatory code. Now it's going after more tax. And international players are calling out sovereign risk.
Just finally, before we let you go, the PRRT, there are reports that the coalition may back some of the changes to the PRRT in exchange for gas projects, you know, being sort of fast-tracked, or at least the approval processes there being fast-tracked. As a matter of principle, do you think the Australian public would be concerned at how the PRRT has been working, that they haven't been getting the revenue that they deserve from Australian resources as a result of how that tax has been operating?
Oh, look, I can't talk for how all Australian people feel. I do think, though, that as an opposition, we've been consistent on these issues. We've said that we will be constructive where we can and critical where we must. On the PRRT, the government has said it wants to increase the tax take. And I think Peter Dutton has been very clear on this, saying, look, we understand why the industry doesn't want the government to work with the Greens, because the Greens really are economic wreckers. The industry would prefer the government works with a coalition. Our view is, well, OK, if you want to work with us on this, return to what I was saying before, Matt, we need more supply in the market. So let's not just look for tax being the solution. You don't tax yourself towards greater supply. That is why we need to see more action to get supply in the market. And as Peter Dutton has said, we're more than happy to work constructively with the government in negotiations to see if we can get an agreed outcome.